Welcome back. In this video, we're going to string everything together. We're going to prepare our view model as well as something called a graph so that we can then use all of the functions in our UI. Well, basically use the view model in the UI so that it's going to take care of loading the data, storing the data, all of the good stuff. So herefore, we need to add something to our view model here. We are going to add a parameter here, which will be the wish repository, which will be of type wish repository. So I'm going to add something a little later where I define how it is by default. So what the wish repository is going to be by default, so that we don't need to set up a wish repository that we actually pass to it. So that means that our wish view model needs a wish repository, but whenever we use our wish view model, we don't want to have to pass it, we want to be able to pass it, which means we need to say by default what it should be by adding an equal sign and then saying how it should be by default. But we cannot do that yet because we need to set up something called a graph. But before we do that, let's just keep going and set everything up in here. So we're going to require our flow. So if we want to get all wishes, var get all wishes, we can use flow to get a list of wishes. Okay, so we need to import flow here. Import class flow from coroutines and import wish as well. So now you see that this doesn't work. Why does this not work? Because we need to add something called a lateinit modifier to our variable. So we have not used lateinit before, but let's look at what it does in this video. So lateinit var is a promise that you make to the Kotlin compiler that the variable will be initialized before you call any operations on it. So how does that work from a flow perspective? So you have to consider that when you want to use a variable, the variable needs to exist. So when you want to access a variable inside of your code later on, the variable needs to exist, because otherwise you run into an error, because basically the variable doesn't exist and you're trying to access it and that crashes your application. So if you want to create a variable that will take some time to be created, like stuff that runs with a coroutine, right? So this whole flow thing, which works via a coroutine, whenever you have something that happens asynchronously and can take a little while, like flow coroutine stuff, then you need to make sure that you add this lateinit, which is a late initializer. We're basically saying, hey, we promise that we're going to initialize this variable before we're going to actually use it. So to delve deeper, lateinit var is often used when you have some property that cannot be initialized during the object creation, but you need it to be non-null once it is initialized. A common scenario is when you're working with dependency injection frameworks like Dagger, or when you're assigning values to properties after some setup method, such as in Android development where you assign views to properties after the layout has been inflated. However, there are some limitations. Lateinit var can only be used with mutable properties since it has to be a var, so we cannot use val, which means the property can be changed. It also can't be used with primitive types. If you try to access lateinit var property before it has been initialized, it will throw an uninitialized property access exception. And that was the error that I was talking about earlier. So basically we're saying, we're going to set this thing up before we need it, because otherwise, if it was a simple variable that we can just set up like so, var my int is going to be 5, for example, right? That's easy. That just happens synchronously and there's no problem with it at all. It's instantly initialized. At the moment we create the variable, we are directly initializing a value to it. But here with a flow, that's not possible because it happens asynchronously. And that's why we need to make sure that we use this lateinit keyword. Remember, use lateinit var when you are sure about the initialization and you want to avoid null checks every time you access the property. So an alternative would have been to constantly check, hey, is this thing null or empty or not? But Flow doesn't even accept that. So basically Flow just says, hey, you need to use lateinit var, otherwise I'm not going to work. So that's step number 1. Now we need to do the actual initialization. So there is this init initializer. We saw that a lot earlier when we looked at classes. So this is basically the initializer. Well, we now are going to use the ViewModel scope and launch our coroutine. And here we can call our getAllWishes, and we're going to assign getAllWishes by using our wish repository and get all wishes from there. So now our get all wishes will be initialized inside of this ViewModel scope, inside of this coroutine scope. Okay, so now get all wishes will be not empty after this initializer. So for our other functions, we have an easier flow here or go at. So basically when we want to add a wish, we're just going to use our ViewModel scope again, because it is also a coroutine that we need to run here. And we're going to use wish repository dot add a wish, where we pass the wish to it. Okay, so whatever wish we get passed to our add wish function, that's the wish we're going to pass here. So we've seen default coroutines, right? Now the routine that we're going to use, this coroutine needs, well, we're going to optimize it, okay? We're going to optimize it by adding dispatchers.io. So we're gonna say what kind of dispatcher we want to use. Now, what are dispatchers? So dispatchers in Kotlin coroutines are responsible for deciding what thread or threads the coroutine will run on. There are several types of dispatchers, each designed for different kinds of operations and workloads. So in our case, we're using dispatchers.io, IO standing for input output. So we're basically using input to add a wish, right? Or output to load a wish. So this one is predefined dispatcher in Kotlin that is optimized for input-output related operations. This means operations that can block the thread they are running on without consuming a lot of CPU. Such operations include reading and writing to files, database operations, and network calls, which often require waiting for the data to be read or written. And during this time, the thread is mostly idle. So that's what this dispatcher.io does. So it maintains a shared pool of threads that can grow or shrink according to the demand. This allows for efficient management of threads when you have many coroutines performing I/O operations that are sporadically active. So by using this, you ensure, by using this dispatchers.io, you ensure that the system's resources are used efficiently and you don't block the main thread, which would otherwise lead to poor application performance and a bad user experience. So in practice, when you launch a coroutine for an I/O task, you would specify the dispatcher like we did right here. And this effectively tells the coroutine builder that the coroutine should run on a thread that is part of the I/O dispatchers thread pool. So that's pretty cool. That's just a way to make it more efficient. So that's how to add a wish. And you know what? Let's just copy this thing and do the same thing for update wish. Okay, so update wish, where we need to pass in the wish. We do the same thing with the view scope here, and we're just saying update wish. All right, so that's our update a wish function. And now we finally just need one, and that will be get a wish by ID. So we need to pass the ID that we want to read, and this will return a flow of wishes. So here, flow, or of a single wish in this case, not of wishes. So we need to return again wish repository dot get a wish by ID, and we pass the ID. Oh yeah, and one thing that we should not miss here is our fun delete wish, because we also want to be able to delete wishes, right? And this will use the same principle here. So ViewModel scope, and here we'll use delete a wish. and then the particular wish that we want to delete. So that's something I have to add at the end, and I added it only after recording like another 10 videos or so, once I actually needed it, but I came back in editing. So if you see this class without this delete wish later on, don't worry about it. We will, however, need this delete wish once we actually want to delete wishes later in the course. So see you in the next video.